Well, to discuss the government's plan for an East Timor processing centre and what's next on the government's agenda as it clears the decks before an election, I was joined just a short time ago by the Prime Minister, Julia Gillard. Prime Minister, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Tony.
How is it good diplomacy to announce your intentions to turn East Timor into an offshore processing centre for asylum seekers without first raising this at all with their government?
Well, as is a matter of public record, Tony, I had spoken to the President of East Timor, Ramos Horta. What I want to do here is outline my intention and my actions. This is something that we are going to get done. I had spoken to the President of East Timor. I've spoken today with the President of Indonesia, and I have tasked Australian officials to now move around the countries of our region, working through the issues to create a regional processing centre.
Well, you say it will happen, but it might not happen, of course, if the East Timorese don't agree to it. So my question is, why didn't you speak to the head of government in East Timor, Xanana Gusmão, who's the Prime Minister?
Well, I thought the appropriate thing was to speak to the President at this stage. Can I say, Tony, this is not an idea without a history. We are engaged in a process in the region called the Bali process to work through issues associated with irregular people movement. I obviously have announced a determination to take the necessary actions to get this done, and I am taking those actions now, including tasking our officials to work with countries in the region to build this idea into an implementable stage. Now, I said frankly yesterday, Tony, this is not a quick fix. I'm not promising a quick fix. I've said that it was going to take time, but I am determined to relentlessly pursue it.
But to relentlessly pursue something, you'd have to pursue it with the actual government, and you haven't even spoken, as I understand it, to the Prime Minister. Why didn't you at least speak to both of them, the President and the Prime Minister, your counterpart in East Timor, Xanana Gusmão?
Well, look, I believed it was appropriate to take a sounding from the President. I've done that, and you've seen his public statements. You would have also seen Prime Minister Gusmão's public statements that he is open to dialogue on the idea, and I will speak to him in coming days. I spoke to the President of Indonesia today. So, Tony, you may have your criticisms about what order I should have spoken to people in, but the reality is I am putting forward what would be a durable solution to the problem of irregular people movement. It is not humane to see people get on boats and potentially risk their lives at sea. It is not humane to have people put themselves in the hands of people smugglers who profit off desperation. The long-term solution for the region here is to have a regional processing centre. We are not the only country in the region that sees irregular people movement. That's why it needs to be a regional solution with resettlement options in countries like Australia and New Zealand, which was why I spoke to the Prime Minister of New Zealand.
We'll talk about that in a minute, but would you have really handled such a sensitive matter of diplomacy in this way were it not for the self-imposed deadline that you have, which is really put in place by Australian public opinion and an impending election?
Well, I have engaged in the steps that I thought were necessary, and I believe it is necessary, Tony, for me to outline to the Australian people my decisions and the actions I'm going to take in relation to people smuggling, and I did that yesterday. Of course, there was a deadline for that statement, and the deadline was the expiration of the 3-month processing pause for Sri Lankan asylum seekers. The government had always said, and I said as incoming Prime Minister, that I would make clear what we were going to do beyond that 3-month processing pause, and I did so.
I just can't understand why you didn't pick up the phone and speak to Xanana Gusmão, who, after all, is the Prime Minister of the government of East Timor, who would be responsible, his government at least, for approving this, not the President.
Well, Tony, you seem to have taken some umbrage at this, but the East Timor President and Prime Minister have not taken any, because you've seen the Prime Minister make statements that he's open to dialogue on the question, and obviously we will be having that dialogue.
All right, President Ramos Horta told us last night that he'd want assistance for asylum seekers to get temporary jobs so that they wouldn't sit idly in a centre as prisoners. Is that something Australia is prepared to help them with?